The Powder River Valley, Wyoming Territory, 1885. Jacob Porter stared at the charred remains of his homestead, the smoke still curling up from the blackened timbers in the early dawn light. The Wyoming wind carried the acrid scent of burned dreams across the valley. At 25, he had already seen too much death for any man. First his parents to cholera, then his wife Sarah to childbirth last winter. Now this fire had claimed the home he built with his own 2 hands. "The frontier gives and the frontier takes," he muttered to himself, adjusting his worn Stetson over his sandy brown hair. "No point getting attached to anything out here." Jacob was no stranger to hard work. His broad shoulders and lean, muscular frame had been shaped by years of breaking horses, mending fences, and driving cattle. But lately his green eyes had lost their spark. The neighboring homesteaders whispered about the handsome young rancher who had grown distant, who pushed away offers of help and friendship. His small ranch, 40 acres and a modest herd, was all he had left. Jacob had convinced himself that was enough. Survival was all that mattered on the frontier. Love was a luxury he could no longer afford, a weakness that left a man vulnerable. "Better to be alone than to lose everything again. Looks like I'll be sleeping in the stable," he told his horse, Ranger, as he saddled up. "Got to get to town, see about lumber." Powder Creek was a 3-hour ride across rolling hills, dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of pine. The small settlement had sprung up to serve the needs of ranchers and homesteaders who had pushed west after the war between the states. It boasted a general store, a saloon, a small church, and little else. Jacob tied Ranger outside Gunderson's general store and pushed through the door, a list of supplies in his hand and determination on his face. That was when he first saw her. She stood behind the counter, her golden blonde hair falling in loose waves to her shoulders, wearing a simple blue cotton dress that matched her eyes. Her sleeves were rolled up as she measured fabric for Mrs. Patterson, her slender fingers working with practiced precision. She couldn't have been more than 20, but there was a quiet confidence about her that caught Jacob's attention. "Be right with you, sir," she called, glancing up with a smile that momentarily froze him in place. When his turn came, Jacob approached the counter, suddenly aware of the trailed dust on his clothes and the stubble on his jaw. "Need supplies," he said gruffly, sliding his list across to her. "House burned down." Her eyes widened. "You're Jacob Porter, aren't you? I heard about the fire. I'm so sorry." He shifted uncomfortably. "News travels fast." "It's a small town," she replied, examining his list. "I'm Bethany Gardner. My uncle owns the store. I just arrived from Boston last week to help him out." "Boston's a long way from Wyoming Territory." Bethany's smile faded slightly. "Yes, well, sometimes you need a fresh start." Something in her tone made Jacob look at her more carefully. There was a shadow behind those blue eyes, a hint of something that didn't belong on such a young face. He recognized it because he saw the same thing in his mirror each morning. "This is quite a list," she said, changing the subject. "Uncle Charles is out with a delivery. We can have these things ready by tomorrow afternoon, but you'll need help hauling it all." "I can manage." "I'm sure you can," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "But everyone needs help sometimes, Mr. Porter. Even in Wyoming." Before Jacob could respond, the door burst open and 3 dusty cowboys stumbled in, already half-drunk despite the early hour. Their loud voices filled the small store as they swaggered toward the counter. "Well, look what we got here," the tallest one said, leering at Bethany. "Gunderson's got himself some pretty new help." Jacob watched Bethany stiffen, though her face remained composed. "Gentlemen," she said firmly, "I'll be with you shortly." "Please wait your turn." The cowboy moved closer, ignoring Jacob entirely. "Don't think I want to wait, miss. Been riding for 3 days, and I'm mighty thirsty for some attention." "Back off, Davis," Jacob said quietly, turning to face him. "The lady asked you to wait." Davis's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "This ain't your business, Porter. Still sore about me buying that parcel you wanted last year." Jacob's hands clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "This isn't about land. It's about manners. You boys can wait your turn or take your business elsewhere." For a tense moment, Jacob thought Davis might push it further, but something in Jacob's eyes must have warned him off. The cowboy spat on the floor, muttered a curse, and backed away, his companions following. "We'll be at the saloon," Davis sneered. Maybe come back when the company's more welcoming. After they left, Bethany let out a breath. Thank you, Mr. Porter. Jacob, he corrected, suddenly embarrassed by the attention. And it was nothing. It wasn't nothing to me, she said quietly. Not everyone would have stepped in. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, Jacob felt something stir inside him, something he thought had died along with Sarah. The sensation was so unexpected that he took a step back. I should go, he said abruptly. I'll return tomorrow for the supplies. As he rode home, Jacob couldn't stop thinking about Bethany Gardner. There was something about her, not just her beauty but her composure, her hidden strength. It unsettled him. He had built his life around the certainty that attachment meant vulnerability, that the safest path was to rely only on himself. A woman from Boston had no place in that equation. Yet when he reached his property and saw the remains of his home, he found himself wondering what Bethany would make of the wide-open spaces, the distant mountains, the sunset painting the Wyoming sky in colors no artist could capture. Then he shook his head, angry at himself for such foolishness. Got no time for daydreaming, he told Ranger as he unsaddled the horse. Got a house to rebuild before winter. The next morning, Jacob awoke stiff and cold in the stable loft. He had slept poorly, troubled by dreams of fire and a pair of blue eyes that seemed to see right through him. After a meager breakfast, he set to work clearing debris from the burned homestead, salvaging what he could. By midday, sweat soaked his shirt despite the cool autumn air. He was so focused on his work that he didn't hear the approaching wagon until it was almost upon him. When he looked up, squinting against the sun, he was startled to see Bethany Gardner driving a team of horses with his supplies in the back. She pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake with practiced ease. Mr. Porter, she called, a slight smile playing at her lips. Your delivery. Jacob approached the wagon, hat in hand. Miss Gardner, I was planning to come into town for these. I know, she replied, climbing down without waiting for his help. But Uncle Charles thought you might need them sooner, considering your situation. And since I know how to drive a team, I volunteered. Jacob looked from Bethany to the loaded wagon. That's mighty thoughtful, but you can handle it yourself, she finished for him, her blue eyes twinkling with amusement. Yes, I'm sure you can, but now you don't have to. Before he could protest further, she was rolling up her sleeves. Now, where would you like these supplies? I assume you're rebuilding in the same spot. Jacob stared at her, taken aback by her directness. Boston women, he decided, were a different breed entirely. Yes, same spot, he finally said. But I can't let you help with the unloading. It's not proper. Bethany laughed, a sound as refreshing as spring water. Mr. Porter, I left proper behind somewhere around the Missouri River. Out here, I suspect what's proper is what's practical, and it's practical for me to help. There was no arguing with her logic, though Jacob tried. In the end, they worked side by side, unloading lumber, nails, tools, and other supplies. He was surprised by her strength and efficiency. This was no delicate society flower unused to hard work. As they worked, Bethany asked about his plans for rebuilding. Jacob found himself explaining more than he intended, not just about the house, but about his small herd of cattle, his hopes to expand his operation, even his dream of breeding horses one day. You have a good eye for this land, she said, pausing to push a loose strand of hair from her face. You see its potential. The land's the easy part, Jacob replied. It's the people that are complicated. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. You've been here how long? 5 years, came west after the war with my wife, Sarah. The words came out before he could stop them. Bethany's expression softened. And where is Sarah now? Jacob turned away, focusing on stacking lumber. Buried on that rise over there, died in childbirth last winter, the baby too. He expected platitudes, the usual awkward expressions of sympathy. Instead, Bethany was quiet for a long moment. The frontier is cruel that way, she finally said. Takes more than it gives sometimes. Jacob looked at her, struck by the understanding in her voice. Sounds like you know something about that. A shadow crossed her face. Perhaps I do, then she straightened her shoulders. It's getting late, I should head back before dark. As Jacob helped her back onto the wagon seat, she hesitated. Mr. Porter, Jacob. The church is organizing a barn raising for you this Saturday. I know you didn't ask for it, but the whole valley heard about the fire. They'll be here at dawn." Jacob frowned. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Bethany replied firmly. "It's community. There's a difference." She gathered the reins. "Besides, Mrs. Patterson is bringing her famous apple pies. Would be a shame to miss those." Before he could form a response, she clicked to the horses and set off, leaving Jacob staring after her, wondering how this woman he barely knew had managed to arrange a barn raising on his behalf, and why he wasn't more annoyed about it. Saturday dawned clear and cool. Jacob had spent the week preparing the site, setting the foundation stones, and clearing away the last of the debris. He'd convinced himself the barn raising wouldn't amount to much. Perhaps a few neighbors would show up, do the minimum to ease their consciences, then leave. He was wrong. By sunrise, wagons were rolling in from all directions. Men with tools, women with food, children running excited circles around the activity. Jacob stood on his porch, overwhelmed by the tide of humanity washing over his property. "Told you they'd come," a voice said behind him. Jacob turned to find Bethany, dressed in a simple work dress and boots, her hair tied back with a ribbon. "I didn't expect all this," he admitted. "That's the thing about expectations," she replied with a smile. "They're often wrong." The day passed in a blur of activity. Jacob found himself working alongside men he barely knew, raising walls, setting rafters, nailing down planks. The women had set up an outdoor kitchen, and the scent of coffee, baking bread, and roasting meat filled the air. By mid-afternoon, the frame of his new house stood complete. Jacob paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked around for Bethany. He spotted her with a group of women rolling out dough for pies. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up and smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached all the way to her eyes. Something shifted in Jacob's chest, a loosening of the tight knot that had been there since Sarah's death. The sensation was so unexpected that he almost missed the commotion at the edge of his property. 3 riders approached, dust rising behind them. Even at a distance, Jacob recognized Davis and his cronies from the general store. The men had clearly come from the saloon, their postures unsteady in the saddle. "Porter," Davis called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Heard you were having a party, didn't get our invitation." The work around Jacob slowed as people turned to watch. He set down his hammer and walked toward the newcomers, conscious of Bethany's worried gaze following him. "This is a barn raising, Davis. You're welcome to help if you're sober enough to swing a hammer." Davis's face darkened. "Don't need your charity work, some of us can build our own places." His bloodshot eyes scanned the crowd, stopping when they found Bethany, "Though I might stay for the company." Jacob stepped into his line of sight. "The lady's not interested." "Why don't we let her decide that?" Davis dismounted clumsily. "How about it, Boston? Want to see what a real Wyoming man looks like?" Before Jacob could intervene, Bethany stepped forward. "Mr. Davis, I believe I've already seen what Wyoming has to offer." Her gaze flicked to Jacob, then back to Davis, "and I find some specimens far superior to others." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Davis's face flushed with anger. "You think you're too good for me. You ain't nothing but an Eastern." "That's enough," Jacob interrupted, his voice cold and hard. "You're drunk, Davis. Go home before you say something you can't take back." For a moment, Jacob thought Davis might throw a punch. Instead, the man spat on the ground. "This ain't over, Porter, you or your fancy woman." He climbed back on his horse with difficulty and rode off, his companions following. The tension broken, people drifted back to their work. Jacob turned to find Bethany still watching him, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I should be thanking you," he replied. "For all this," he gestured at the activity around them. "It wasn't me. These people were already willing to help. They just needed someone to organize them." She paused. "They care about you, Jacob. Even if you've been keeping them at arm's length." Before he could respond, she was called away to help with dinner preparations. Jacob watched her go, struck by her words. Had he really been pushing everyone away? He'd told himself he was being self-reliant, the way a frontier man should be. But looking at the community gathered on his land, he wondered if he'd been wrong about more than just expectations. As the sun began to set, the new house stood nearly complete, walls up, roof on, windows and doors installed. It wouldn't be finished inside, but it would be weathertight before the first snow. People began packing up, tired but satisfied with the day's work. Jacob stood on the porch of his new home, shaking hands and thanking everyone who had helped. When Bethany approached to say goodbye, he found himself reluctant to see her go. "Will you come by the store next week?" she asked. "Uncle Charles ordered some books from Denver, thought you might want first look." Jacob nodded, surprised by the invitation. "I'd like that." She smiled, and that strange loosening happened in his chest again. "Good night, Jacob Porter." As he watched her wagon disappear down the road, Jacob realized something had changed today. Not just his physical circumstances, but something inside him. For the first time since Sarah's death, he had allowed himself to feel like part of something larger than his own grief. The frontier might be cruel, but it wasn't meant to be faced alone. That night, sleeping in his partially finished house, Jacob dreamed not of fire, but of blue eyes and the possibility of beginning again. Over the next few weeks, Jacob found reasons to visit Powder Creek more often than strictly necessary. Each time he told himself it was for supplies, or to check mail, or to hear news from the outside world. Each time he found himself lingering at Gunderson's general store, talking with Bethany. He learned that she had come west after the death of her parents, seeking a new start with her only remaining family. She never spoke of Boston directly, but sometimes her eyes would grow distant when certain topics arose. Jacob sensed there was more to her story, perhaps a broken engagement or some other heartache, but he didn't press. Everyone on the frontier had ghosts they preferred to leave buried. As autumn deepened toward winter, Jacob finished the interior of his house. It was simple but sturdy, built to withstand Wyoming winters. Still, on cold nights when the wind howled around the eaves, he couldn't help but feel the emptiness of the rooms. He had built a house, but it wasn't a home. One November afternoon, Jacob rode into town to find Gunderson's closed early, a situation so unusual that he asked about it at the saloon. "Old man Gunderson took sick," the barkeep informed him. "Influenza, they're saying. His niece has been nursing him day and night." Concerned, Jacob rode to the small house behind the store where Charles Gunderson lived. When Bethany answered his knock, the exhaustion in her face told him all he needed to know. "Jacob," she said, surprise momentarily lifting the weariness from her expression. "What are you doing here?" "Heard Mr. Gunderson was ill. Came to see if you needed anything." She glanced over her shoulder, then stepped outside, closing the door softly behind her. In the fading light, Jacob could see the strain of the past days etched in the shadows beneath her eyes. "It's bad," she admitted quietly. "The doctor's been, but there's not much he can do except wait. Uncle Charles hasn't kept anything down in 2 days." Jacob had seen influenza before. During the war, it had swept through the camps, sometimes killing more men than bullets. "You need help," he said. "You can't manage the store and care for him alone." "I closed the store," she replied. "Uncle Charles is all that matters now. At least let me bring firewood, fresh water. You need to rest or you'll fall ill too." She hesitated, then nodded, too tired to argue. "Thank you." For the next week, Jacob rode into town each day, bringing supplies and staying to help however he could. He chopped wood, fetched water from the well, and sat with Mr. Gunderson so Bethany could sleep. The old man's condition worsened, then stabilized, then slowly began to improve. On the 7th night, as a light snow fell outside, Jacob sat by the fire while Bethany dozed in a chair on the other side of the hearth. Mr. Gunderson was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, his breathing easier. Jacob watched Bethany's face in the firelight, the golden glow softening her features, making her look even younger than her 20 years. Something protective stirred in him, a feeling he had thought died with Sarah, but this was different somehow. With Sarah, he had been young, idealistic, convinced that love alone could conquer any frontier hardship. Now he knew better. Love wasn't enough. You needed strength, resilience, a partner who understood the realities of this harsh land. As if sensing his gaze, Bethany opened her eyes. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the fire, something unspoken passing between them. "Why did you help us?" she finally asked, her voice soft in the quiet room. "You barely know us." Jacob considered his answer carefully. "Out here, we look after our own." "Is that what I am now, one of your own?" The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Before Jacob could respond, a sound from the bedroom drew their attention. Mr. Gunderson was awake and calling for water. The moment passed, but something had changed between them. As Jacob rode home through the gently falling snow, he realized he was no longer just visiting Bethany out of curiosity or even attraction. She had become important to him, perhaps even necessary. The thought terrified him. By December, Charles Gunderson had recovered enough to reopen the store, though he tired easily and relied heavily on Bethany. The first major snowfall of the season blanketed the valley, making travel between homesteads difficult but not impossible. Jacob had spent the week preparing his cattle for winter, ensuring they had access to feed and protection from the worst of the weather. His small herd had grown since spring, and he took pride in their condition. With luck and good management, he would turn a profit come spring. On a clear, cold Saturday, he rode into town with a purpose. He had been thinking about Christmas, his first without Sarah, and found himself wanting to mark the occasion somehow. The idea of spending the holiday alone in his new house held no appeal. Before he quite realized what he was doing, he was asking Bethany and her uncle to join him for Christmas dinner. "That's very kind," she said, clearly surprised by the invitation, "but wouldn't you rather come here?" Uncle Charles still tires easily. Jacob hadn't considered that. Of course, I should have thought. Unless, Bethany interrupted, a speculative look in her eyes, you want to show off that new house of yours. There was a teasing note in her voice that made Jacob smile despite himself. Maybe I do, it's a fine house. Then perhaps we should compromise. We'll have Christmas Eve dinner here and Christmas Day at your ranch. That way Uncle Charles can rest between, and you can show me this fine house you're so proud of. The way she said it, as if their spending 2 consecutive days together was the most natural thing in the world, caught Jacob off guard. But he found himself nodding in agreement. As Christmas approached, Jacob found himself taking extra care with his home. He fashioned new curtains from fabric bought at Gunderson's, built a proper dining table and chairs, even hunted down a small pine tree to decorate with paper ornaments and candles. When he stepped back to survey his work, he realized he was nesting, creating not just a house but a home. Christmas Eve at the Gundersons was everything Jacob had not allowed himself to miss in the years since Sarah's death. The small house was warm and fragrant with the scents of roast goose, spiced apples, and fresh bread. Charles Gunderson, though still frail, was in good spirits, entertaining Jacob with stories of his own early days on the frontier. But it was Bethany who made the evening magical. She had transformed the modest home with greenery, candles, and small handmade decorations. She moved through the space with a grace that seemed to touch everything around her, her laughter a counterpoint to the crackling fire. After dinner, as Charles dozed in his chair, Bethany brought out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Merry Christmas, Jacob," she said, placing it in his hands. "It isn't much." Jacob carefully unwrapped the gift to find a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with a simple design of mountains and prairie. "You mentioned wanting to keep better records for your ranch," she explained. "I thought this might help." Jacob ran his fingers over the soft leather, touched beyond words. "It's perfect," he finally said. "But I feel foolish now. I left your gifts at home for tomorrow." Bethany smiled. "Then I have something to look forward to." As Jacob prepared to leave, Bethany walked him to the door. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black sky. "Thank you for tonight," he said, suddenly awkward. "It's been a long time since I celebrated Christmas properly." "For me too," she admitted. "In Boston, everything was formal, proper. Here," she looked up at the star-filled sky. "Here, everything feels more real somehow." Their eyes met, and Jacob felt that now familiar tightening in his chest. Before he could second-guess himself, he leaned down and kissed her, a brief, gentle touch of lips that ended almost before it began. When he pulled back, Bethany's eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed. For a terrible moment he thought he had misread everything between them. "I'm sorry," he began. "I shouldn't have." Bethany reached up and placed her fingers against his lips. "Don't you dare apologize, Jacob Porter." Then she rose on tiptoe and returned his kiss, this one lasting long enough to warm him despite the December chill. "Merry Christmas," she whispered when they parted. Jacob rode home through the starlit night, his mind racing with possibilities he had not allowed himself to consider until now. The kiss replayed in his thoughts, along with all the moments that had led to it. Bethany driving the wagon of supplies, standing up to Davis, caring for her uncle, transforming her modest home into a haven of warmth and light. For the first time, he let himself imagine a future that included more than just survival, a future with companionship, partnership, perhaps even love. The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the snow-covered landscape glittering in the sunlight. Jacob spent the early hours preparing for his guests, ensuring the fire was well stoked and the house warm. He had hunted a wild turkey for their dinner and gathered pine branches to decorate the table. When he heard the sound of approaching hooves, he stepped outside to greet them. Charles rode a gentle mare while Bethany drove a small sleigh, both bundled against the cold. "Merry Christmas," Bethany called, her cheeks pink from the cold, her eyes bright with excitement. Jacob helped her from the sleigh, his hands lingering at her waist. "Merry Christmas," he replied, suddenly shy after the boldness of last night's kiss. But Bethany's smile banished his awkwardness. She looked up at his house with open curiosity. "So this is the famous Porter Ranch, show me everything." The day passed in a blur of shared meals, laughter, and easy conversation. Charles, though still weak, seemed to draw energy from the young people's happiness. After dinner, he dozed by the fire while Jacob showed Bethany his small herd, his stable, the spring that never froze even in the deepest winter. As the short winter day began to fade, they stood together on a rise overlooking the property, the land spread out before them in a panorama of white and gold. "It's beautiful," Bethany said softly. "You've built something wonderful here, Jacob." "It's still rough," he replied, seeing the property through her eyes, the unfinished barn, the crude corrals, the house that needed paint and proper windows. "But it's a start." "A good start," she agreed. She turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. "Jacob, there's something I need to tell you about why I left Boston." He looked down at her, noting the shadow that had returned to her eyes. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted. If what's happening between us is to go any further, you need to know." Jacob nodded, his heart beating faster at her acknowledgement of the growing connection between them. "I was engaged," she began, "to a man named William Bradford. His family and mine had been friends for generations, and the match was considered perfect by everyone except me." She looked away. "William wanted a proper Boston wife, someone to host his parties and raise his children, and never have an opinion that differed from his own." "And that wasn't you," Jacob guessed. Bethany shook her head. "I tried to be what he wanted. But the more I tried, the less I recognized myself." She drew a deep breath. "When my parents died of typhoid last year, William expected me to proceed with the wedding as planned. When I suggested postponing, he became angry. Controlling." Jacob's hands clenched involuntarily. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically," she said quickly. "But he made it clear that as his wife, I would have no say in any decisions. My inheritance would become his to manage. My life would become his to direct." She looked up at Jacob. "I broke the engagement and came west. William threatened to follow to force me to honor our commitment. That's why I rarely mention Boston. I'm afraid he might find me." Jacob processed this information, understanding now the shadow that sometimes crossed her face, the way she avoided certain topics. "He can't force you to marry him." "Not here." "I know that now," she agreed, "but at the time I was frightened. Uncle Charles offered me sanctuary, a place to start over I never expected." She trailed off, her eyes meeting his. "What?" Jacob asked softly. "What didn't you expect?" "You," she whispered. "I never expected to find someone who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't want to change a thing." Jacob reached for her then, drawing her into his arms, his heart fuller than he had believed possible after Sarah's death. "Bethany Gardner, the last thing I'd ever want to do is change you." Their kiss was different this time, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. When they finally parted, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I've been afraid too," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I convinced myself it was safer to be alone. That love was a luxury I couldn't afford out here." "And now?" Bethany asked, her eyes searching his. "Now I think maybe it's a necessity," he replied. "Maybe we need love to survive the frontier, not in spite of it." The moment was interrupted by a shout from the house. They turned to see Charles standing on the porch, pointing urgently toward the road. 3 riders approached through the gathering dusk, their figures dark against the snow. Even at a distance, Jacob recognized Davis and his companions. "Get back to the house," he told Bethany, his voice tight. "Take your uncle inside." "Jacob." Please, he said, I'll handle this. Reluctantly, she nodded and hurried back to the house. Jacob walked down to meet the riders, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Davis pulled up a few yards away, his face flushed with more than just the cold. The smell of whiskey carried on the winter air. "Merry Christmas, Porter," he slurred. "Saw the smoke from your chimney, thought we'd pay a neighborly visit." Jacob stood his ground. "This isn't a good time, Davis. I have guests." "Yeah, we saw the sleigh." Davis's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "That Boston girl's got you wrapped around her finger, don't she? What would Sarah say about that?" The mention of his late wife's name from Davis's lips sent a surge of anger through Jacob. "You need to leave." "No." Davis ignored him, turning to his companions. "See, boys, told you he'd gone soft for that Eastern filly. Probably doesn't even remember how his wife died alone while he was off driving cattle." Jacob's hand tightened on his gun. "Last warning, Davis, get off my land." Davis's hand moved toward his own weapon. "Or what, Porter? You gonna shoot me over some fancy?" The shot rang out, startling them all. Jacob looked back to see Bethany on the porch, a rifle in her hands pointed skyward. "Next one won't be a warning," she called, her voice steady despite the distance. "Mr. Davis, I suggest you take Mr. Porter's advice and leave." For a tense moment, Jacob thought Davis might be drunk enough to try something stupid. But the sight of Bethany with the rifle, and the knowledge that she clearly knew how to use it, seemed to penetrate his alcohol-fogged brain. "This ain't over," he muttered, jerking his horse around. "You'll regret this, both of you." Jacob watched them ride away, his heart pounding with adrenaline and something else. Pride in Bethany's courage, mixed with fear for what Davis might do when sober. When he returned to the house, Bethany was calmly unloading the rifle. "Uncle Charles showed me how to shoot the first week I arrived," she explained, seeing his expression. "He said a woman alone needs to know how to protect herself." "He was right," Jacob agreed, taking the weapon from her hands. "But Davis is dangerous when he's drinking. And he has a long memory for grudges." "I'm not afraid of him," Bethany said firmly. "Maybe you should be," Jacob replied. "We both should be." The incident cast a shadow over the remainder of their Christmas, though they tried not to let it show for Charles's sake. When it was time for the Gundersons to leave, Jacob insisted on escorting them back to town, unwilling to let them travel alone with Davis's threat hanging in the air. The next few weeks passed in a strange combination of growing closeness between Jacob and Bethany and increasing tension in the valley. Davis had been spreading rumors in the saloon, suggestions that Bethany was not the respectable woman she appeared to be, that she had fled Boston under suspicious circumstances, that her relationship with Jacob had begun while Sarah was still alive. Most people ignored the gossip, knowing Davis's character, but some of the more conservative women in town began to treat Bethany coolly. Business at the store suffered as a result. Jacob, furious on Bethany's behalf, wanted to confront Davis directly, but Bethany convinced him that would only make matters worse. "People will see through his lies eventually," she assured him. "In the meantime, we have to be careful not to give them anything to talk about." Which meant their courtship, for that was what it had become, had to be conducted with the utmost propriety. No more stolen kisses, no rides alone together, no moments of privacy. Every visit was in the presence of Charles or other chaperones, every conversation potentially observed and judged by the town's watchful eyes. Despite these constraints, or perhaps because of them, their feelings for each other deepened. Jacob found himself planning his future around Bethany's presence in it. He began expanding his herd, improving his land, building a larger barn, all with the unspoken understanding that he was creating a place for her, for them. By February, Jacob had decided to ask Bethany to marry him. He rode into town with the intention of speaking to Charles first, as tradition demanded. But when he arrived at the store, he found it closed in the middle of the day, a sign on the door reading simply, "Family Emergency." Alarmed, Jacob hurried to the Gunderson house. Charles answered his knock, his face grave. "Jacob," he said, clearly relieved to see him, "thank God you're here." "What's happened? Is Bethany all right?" Charles ushered him inside. "She's upset but physically unharmed." "A letter came from Boston today." He lowered his voice. "From William Bradford." Jacob's stomach clenched. He found her. Charles nodded. "He's on his way here. Claims she still has property of his, family heirlooms, he says." It's a pretext, of course. He wants to force her to return with him. Where is she? In her room. She's been there since the letter arrived. Jacob hesitated, torn between his desire to see Bethany and the knowledge that entering her private room would be considered highly improper. Can you ask if she'll speak with me? Charles nodded and disappeared down the hallway. A few moments later, Bethany emerged, her face pale but composed. Jacob, she said softly, I'm sorry you rode all this way to find us in such a state. Don't apologize, he replied, resisting the urge to go to her. Charles told me about the letter from Bradford. She nodded, her hands twisting together. He says he'll be here within the month. The railroads make travel so much faster now. She trailed off, her eyes distant. I thought I was free of him. You are, Jacob said firmly. He has no claim on you, Bethany, not legally, not morally. You don't know William, she replied. He doesn't accept defeat. And he has powerful friends, connections with the territorial government. Jacob took a step toward her, then stopped, acutely aware of Charles watching them. Bethany, I came to town today for a reason. To speak with your uncle about our future. She looked up, her eyes widening. Jacob. I love you, he said simply. I want to marry you if you'll have me. Charles cleared his throat. Perhaps I should give you two a moment. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Alone with Bethany, Jacob closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. I know this isn't how I planned to ask. But hearing about Bradford, it just makes it more urgent. Marry me, Bethany, let me protect you from him. She pulled her hands away, her expression troubled. Is that why you're asking, to protect me? No, Jacob said quickly. I mean, yes, I want to protect you, but that's not why I'm asking. I'm asking because I love you, because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Even with all this complication, William will still come, Jacob. Marriage won't stop him from trying to cause trouble. Then we'll face him together, Jacob insisted. I'm not afraid of William Bradford or his connections. Bethany studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her, because the tension gradually left her body. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I will marry you, Jacob Porter, not to escape William, but because I love you too. Jacob pulled her into his arms, relief and joy flooding through him. As he held her, he made a silent promise to himself and to her that no man, especially not one from her past, would ever threaten her happiness again. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Powder Creek, with Charles giving the bride away and the whole community in attendance, even those who had listened to Davis's rumors. The sight of Bethany in her simple white dress, walking toward him with trust and love in her eyes, was a moment Jacob knew he would carry with him forever. Their honeymoon was brief, just 3 days at a hotel in the nearest large town, before they returned to the Porter Ranch, now their shared home. Jacob had prepared for Bethany's arrival, adding feminine touches to the house based on Charles's suggestions. But it was Bethany herself who truly transformed the space, filling it with warmth and life in ways Jacob hadn't anticipated. The first weeks of marriage were a revelation for both of them. They learned each other's habits, preferences, histories. Jacob discovered Bethany's love of reading aloud in the evenings, her surprising skill with figures and accounts, her deep-seated fear of thunderstorms. She learned about his nightmares from the war, his secret talent for whittling, his boundless patience with injured animals. Together, they settled into a rhythm of work and companionship. Bethany took over the ranch accounts, revealing a shrewd business mind that complemented Jacob's practical knowledge of cattle and land. Under her management, they began to show a profit beyond Jacob's most optimistic projections. But the shadow of William Bradford's imminent arrival hung over their happiness. Each day, Bethany would tense when Jacob returned from town with the mail, only relaxing when he reported no word from Boston. Maybe he's changed his mind, she suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. It's been almost a month since his letter. Jacob squeezed her hand. Maybe. Or maybe the spring thaw delayed his travel. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I hate that he still has this power to make me afraid even from a distance. He only has the power you give him, Jacob replied gently. And you're not alone anymore. The next day, Jacob rode into town for supplies. As he loaded his wagon outside Gunderson's, a commotion near the stagecoach stop caught his attention. A well-dressed man was descending from the coach, looking around with an expression of distaste. Everything about him, from his expensive suit to his carefully groomed appearance, marked him as an Easterner. Jacob's instincts told him this was William Bradford even before he heard the name spoken by the station master. Setting aside his supplies, he approached the newcomer. "Mr. Bradford," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Powder Creek. I'm Jacob Porter." Bradford looked at the offered hand as if it might soil his gloves, then reluctantly shook it. "Porter, the name means nothing to me." "It should," Jacob replied evenly. "I'm Bethany's husband." The shock on Bradford's face would have been comical under different circumstances. "Husband," he repeated, his voice rising. "That's impossible. Bethany is engaged to me." "Was engaged," Jacob corrected. "She broke it off before leaving Boston. We were married 3 weeks ago." Bradford's expression darkened. "This is absurd. Bethany and I have an understanding, a legal agreement." "Not according to her," Jacob said. "And not according to Wyoming law. She's my wife now, Mr. Bradford. Whatever business you thought you had with her, you can discuss with me." A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the confrontation between the local rancher and the Eastern gentleman. Bradford seemed to become aware of their audience, his face smoothing into a mask of civility. "Very well, Mr. Porter. I would like to speak with you privately about this matter. Perhaps you could direct me to suitable accommodations, and we can meet later." Jacob nodded, not trusting the man's sudden reasonableness, but unwilling to create more of a scene. "The Powder Creek Hotel is just down the street. It's clean, if not fancy. We can talk there after you've settled in." As Bradford walked away, Jacob felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Charles Gunderson. "Be careful," the older man warned. "That one has a silver tongue and a heart of stone." Jacob nodded. "I know. I need to get back to Bethany, tell her he's here." "That might be best," Charles agreed. "And Jacob, don't underestimate him. Men like Bradford aren't used to losing." The ride home was tense, Jacob's mind racing with strategies for handling Bradford. When he arrived at the ranch, he found Bethany in the garden she had started, her hands deep in the spring soil. She looked up with a smile that faded as soon as she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" "Bradford's in town," he said simply. "Just arrived on the afternoon stage." Bethany paled, her hands stilling. "Did you speak to him?" Jacob nodded, kneeling beside her in the dirt. He was surprised to learn we're married. "I imagine he was," she said, a hint of bitter amusement in her voice. "William doesn't handle surprises well. I told him any business he had with you could go through me. And he agreed to that." Jacob hesitated. He suggested we meet later after he's settled at the hotel. "I think he's planning something, Bethany." He was too composed, too reasonable. She brushed the soil from her hands, her face set in determined lines. "Then I'm coming with you. This is my fight too, Jacob." "Are you sure? You don't have to face him." "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "I've been running from William for nearly a year. It's time I stood my ground." Jacob helped her to her feet, prouder of her courage than he could express. Together, then. They rode into town that evening, the last light of day fading from the sky. The Powder Creek Hotel was the tallest building in town, 2 full stories of painted clapboard with actual glass windows, a luxury that reflected the town's growing prosperity. Bradford was waiting for them in the small parlor, his expression changing from anticipation to wariness when he saw Bethany beside Jacob. "Bethany," he said, standing as they entered. "You're looking well." His eyes took in her simple dress, her sun-kissed skin, the confidence in her posture. "Frontier life seems to agree with you." "It does," she replied, her voice steady. "Hello, William." "You're a long way from Boston." "Too far," he agreed, "and for what appears to be a fool's errand." He gestured for them to sit. "I've spent considerable time and resources tracking you down, only to find you've thrown yourself away on a rancher." The way he said rancher, as if it were a particularly distasteful occupation, made Jacob's jaw tighten. But he remained silent, following Bethany's lead. "I haven't thrown myself away," she said calmly. "I've made a life here, a good life with a good man." Bradford's smile didn't reach his eyes. A temporary infatuation, I'm sure. The Wild West has its romantic appeal, I understand. But really, Bethany, this has gone on long enough. It's time to come home. I am home, she replied. My place is here now with Jacob. And what about your obligations? Your family name, the Bradford jewels you took when you fled. Bethany's eyes flashed. I took nothing that wasn't mine. The pearls were my mother's, given to me on my 16th birthday. They were promised as part of our marriage settlement, Bradford countered. A contract you've broken. Jacob could remain silent no longer. There is no contract, Bradford. Bethany broke your engagement before leaving Boston. She owes you nothing. Bradford turned to him, his manner coldly dismissive. This doesn't concern you, Porter. This is between Bethany and myself. She's my wife, Jacob said firmly. That makes it my concern. A tense silence followed, broken only when Bradford reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document. Perhaps this will clarify matters. He placed it on the table between them. A legal notice demanding the return of Bradford family property or equivalent financial compensation. If you refuse, I'll be forced to pursue the matter in court. Jacob glanced at the paper, noting the official seals and signatures. You had this prepared before you even arrived. I like to be thorough, Bradford replied with a thin smile. My attorney assures me the territorial courts will recognize the claim. Bethany reached for the document, her hands steady as she scanned its contents. $10,000, she said flatly. That's 20 times what those pearls are worth. Their sentimental value is incalculable, Bradford replied smoothly, but I'm willing to be reasonable. Return to Boston with me, and we can forget this unfortunate episode entirely. The true purpose of Bradford's visit became clear to Jacob in that moment. The legal notice was simply leverage, a means to pressure Bethany into returning with him. His pride couldn't accept her rejection, her choice of a Western rancher over a Boston gentleman. She's not going anywhere with you, Jacob said, his voice low and dangerous. And if you try to force the issue, legally or otherwise, you'll regret it. Bradford's expression hardened. Is that a threat, Porter? A promise, Jacob replied. Bethany has made her choice. Respect it and go home. Bradford turned to Bethany, ignoring Jacob entirely. Think carefully about what you're doing. This marriage can be annulled. Your place is in Boston with your own kind. Do you really want to spend your life as a rancher's wife, bearing his children, watching your hands grow rough with labor? Bethany stood, her eyes flashing with a fire Jacob had glimpsed only rarely. My own kind. My own kind are people who respect me, who value me for myself, not as an ornament or a possession. She lifted her chin. And yes, I want exactly that life you describe with Jacob, building something real together, raising children who will know the meaning of honest work and true love. Bradford's face flushed with anger. You've changed. The Bethany I knew would never speak this way. The Bethany you knew never existed except in your imagination, she replied. I was trying to be what you and my parents wanted. But this, she gestured to herself, to Jacob, to the world beyond the hotel walls, this is who I really am. For a moment, Bradford seemed genuinely taken aback. Then his expression closed, becoming coldly calculating. Very well, if that's your decision, I'll see you in court, both of you. He gathered the legal notice and returned it to his jacket. Good evening. After he left, Bethany sank back into her chair, trembling slightly. Jacob moved to kneel beside her, taking her hands in his. Are you all right? She nodded, then shook her head. I don't know, that was harder than I expected. You were magnificent, Jacob told her. I've never been prouder of anyone in my life. A small smile touched her lips. Was I? I felt like I might faint the entire time. No one would have known, he assured her, least of all Bradford. Her smile faded. He won't give up, Jacob. This legal notice, it's just the beginning. William has connections, resources. He could make things very difficult for us. Jacob squeezed her hands. Let him try. We have something he doesn't understand and can't fight against. What's that? Each other, Jacob said simply, and a community that stands behind us. As they rode home through the gathering darkness, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that Bradford's threat was more than just legal posturing. The man's pride had been wounded, his control challenged. Men like that were dangerous, especially when they believed they had nothing to lose. Over the next few days, Bradford made his presence felt throughout Powder Creek. He took a room at the hotel indefinitely, introduced himself to the town's more prominent citizens, and made a point of being seen in conversation with the local judge and sheriff. Jacob, meanwhile, sought legal advice from a lawyer in the county seat. The news wasn't encouraging. While Bradford's claim was almost certainly exaggerated, defending against it would be costly and time-consuming. And given Bradford's apparent connections with territorial officials, the outcome was far from certain. "We could just pay him," Bethany suggested one evening as they discussed their options. "The ranch is doing well. In a few years, we could save enough." Jacob shook his head. "It's not about the money for him, you know that. If we pay, he'll just come up with another demand." She sighed, leaning against him as they sat on the porch swing. "I know. I just hate what this is doing to us, to the town. Did you hear that he's been spreading rumors that our marriage isn't legal, that I was still under contract to him when we wed?" Jacob had heard. The rumors had divided the town, most supporting the Porters, but some beginning to view Bethany with suspicion. Business at Gunderson's had suffered further, and Charles had reported overhearing harsh words about his niece at church. "We'll weather this," Jacob assured her, though his own confidence was wavering. "Bradford will eventually realize he can't win and go back to Boston." But Bradford showed no signs of leaving. Instead, he seemed to be settling in, learning the town's dynamics, identifying allies and enemies. He made a point of being seen in conversation with Davis and his cronies, a development that worried Jacob more than he admitted to Bethany. The situation came to a head a week after Bradford's arrival. Jacob had ridden into town to meet with Charles about a possible business partnership expanding the store to include ranch supplies. As he left Gunderson's, he found Bradford and Davis waiting for him in the street. "Porter," Bradford called, his voice carrying down the dusty road. "A word, if you don't mind." Jacob approached cautiously, noting that Davis had positioned himself to block the path to his horse. "What do you want, Bradford?" "I've been thinking about our situation," Bradford replied, his tone reasonable, "and I believe I've found a solution that benefits everyone." "There is no situation," Jacob said. "And the only solution is for you to accept reality and go home." Bradford smiled thinly. "Reality is often negotiable out here, I've found. For instance, I've discovered some interesting information about your property claim." Jacob tensed. "My claim is solid. I've worked that land for 5 years. "Yes, but there seems to be some question about the original filing. Mr. Davis here tells me there was some dispute about the boundaries when you first arrived." Jacob glanced at Davis, who was watching the exchange with ill-concealed satisfaction. "That was settled years ago." "Perhaps," Bradford acknowledged, "but the Territorial Land Office might see things differently if certain irregularities were brought to their attention, especially with sworn testimony from neighbors." The threat was clear. Bradford was preparing to challenge Jacob's ownership of the ranch, the home he had built, the land he had worked, the future he had planned with Bethany. "This is blackmail," Jacob said quietly. "I prefer to think of it as leverage," Bradford replied. "Here's my offer. Sign over half interest in your ranch to me as compensation for the Bradford property Bethany took, and I'll ensure there are no challenges to your land claim." Jacob stared at him in disbelief. "You want my ranch?" "Half of it," Bradford corrected. "I find I'm developing an interest in Western investments. Cattle ranching seems quite profitable these days." "And if I refuse?" Bradford shrugged. "Then I'll be forced to pursue all available legal remedies for both the property claim and the land dispute. It could take years to resolve, during which time your ownership would be in question." "Banks don't typically lend against disputed property, I understand." Jacob's mind raced, calculating the implications. Without the ability to secure loans against his land, expansion would be impossible. The ranch would stagnate, perhaps even fail if a bad season hit and they couldn't borrow to see them through. "I need time to consider this," he said finally. "Of course," Bradford agreed magnanimously, "take 24 hours. I'll expect your answer tomorrow afternoon." He glanced at Davis. Mr. Davis has kindly offered to act as my local representative in this matter, should we come to an agreement. As Bradford walked away, Davis lingered, his expression triumphant. Not so high and mighty now, are you, Porter? Should have minded your own business when you had the chance. Jacob ignored him, his thoughts already turning to Bethany and how he would explain this latest development. As he rode home, the weight of Bradford's threat pressed down on him. The ranch was more than just land and cattle, it was the future he had promised Bethany, the home they were building together. When he arrived, he found Bethany in the kitchen garden, humming as she worked. The sight of her, happy, content, belonging so perfectly to this place, strengthened his resolve. He would not let Bradford take this from them. As gently as possible, he explained Bradford's proposal and its implications. Bethany listened without interrupting, her face growing paler as he spoke. "This is my fault," she said when he finished. "If I hadn't come here, brought my problems with me." "Stop," Jacob interrupted firmly. "This isn't your fault, it's Bradford's. He's the one who can't accept that you've made your own choice." "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice small. Jacob took her hands in his. "We're going to fight. Bradford thinks he can use the law and his connections to take what's ours, but he doesn't understand this place, these people." "But Davis is one man with a few friends," Jacob said. "We have more, the people who came to raise our barn, who stood with us in church. They're the real Wyoming, not men like Davis." Bethany looked unconvinced, but she nodded. "What's your plan?" "First, we need to secure our land claim. I'm riding to the county seat tonight to file additional paperwork, bring back copies of the original survey. Then we gather our friends, Charles, the sheriff, anyone else who can help spread the word about what Bradford's trying to do." "He won't like being exposed," Bethany warned. "That's counting on," Jacob replied. "Men like Bradford operate in shadows. They don't like the light of public scrutiny." Jacob rode through the night to reach the county land office, returning the next morning with the documents they needed. He went straight to town, stopping first at Gunderson's to explain the situation to Charles. The older man was outraged. "This is extortion, pure and simple. That bastard thinks because he has money and connections, he can take whatever he wants." "Not this time," Jacob said. "But I need your help. We need to make sure everyone knows what he's trying to do." Charles agreed immediately. "Leave it to me. By noon, there won't be a soul in Powder Creek who doesn't know Bradford's game." Jacob's next stop was the sheriff's office. Sheriff Morgan was a gruff, practical man who had little patience for outsiders causing trouble in his town. "Can't arrest him for making an offer, no matter how shady it sounds," Morgan said after hearing Jacob's story. "But I can keep an eye on him, make sure he understands the limits of his welcome here." By the time Jacob headed to the hotel to give Bradford his answer, word of the Easterner's scheme had spread through town. As Jacob walked down the main street, he noted the hard looks directed at the hotel, the way conversations stopped when he passed. Powder Creek was choosing sides. Bradford was waiting in the hotel parlor, looking satisfied with himself. His expression changed when he saw Jacob's face. "I take it you've made your decision," he said, less confident than before. "I have," Jacob replied, placing the land documents on the table between them. "The answer is no. No to your offer, no to your threats, no to everything you represent." Bradford's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Porter, one that will cost you dearly." "The only mistake was thinking you could come here and bully us into submission," Jacob said. "This isn't Boston, Bradford. Out here, a man's word and his work mean something. The community stands together against threats, whether they come from nature or from men like you." "Community," Bradford sneered. "These rough-hewn settlers and failed farmers, they have no power against the law." "That's where you're wrong," Jacob replied. "They are the law, the sheriff, the judge, the territorial representatives, they all come from communities like this one. And they don't take kindly to outsiders threatening one of their own." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Bradford's face. "You think your frontier justice will prevail against my attorneys, my connections with the governor?" "I know it will," Jacob said confidently. "Because while you've been plotting in this hotel, we've been building something you can't buy or steal. Trust, friendship, a place where Bethany truly belongs." As if on cue, the hotel door opened and Bethany entered, followed by Charles and Sheriff Morgan. Behind them, visible through the windows, a crowd had gathered in the street, ranchers, shopkeepers, homesteaders, all watching with grim determination. Bradford looked from Jacob to the others, then back again. What is this? Some kind of frontier intimidation. This, Jacob said quietly, is Wyoming showing you the door. You have a choice, Bradford. You can leave on today's stage, go back to Boston, and forget about us. Or you can stay and fight, against not just me, but everyone you see here. Bradford's face flushed with anger. You think this mob scares me? I have the law on my side. Sheriff Morgan stepped forward. Actually, you don't. I've sent a wire to the territorial capital about your activities here. Seems the governor isn't fond of Eastern speculators using questionable methods to acquire Wyoming land. Something about protecting frontier development. And as for your claim against Bethany, Charles added, I've had a response from my attorney in Denver. The pearls were clearly a gift documented in her mother's will. Your claim wouldn't stand up in any court, east or west. Bradford looked trapped, his careful plans unraveling before his eyes. He turned to Bethany, a last desperate appeal. Is this really what you want? To throw away your heritage, your breeding for this. He gestured dismissively at Jacob, at the town beyond the windows. Bethany met his gaze without flinching. This is exactly what I want, William, this place, these people, this man. They're more real, more true, than anything I ever had in Boston. For a long moment, Bradford stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the parlor, up the stairs toward his room. He'll be on the afternoon stage, Sheriff Morgan predicted. Men like that don't have the stomach for a real fight. Jacob wasn't so sure, but he kept his doubts to himself. As they left the hotel, the crowd outside parted to let them through, many reaching out to clasp Jacob's hand or touch Bethany's arm in solidarity. This, Jacob realized, was what he had been missing in his years of self-imposed isolation, the strength that came from belonging to something larger than himself. Bradford did indeed leave on the afternoon stage, his departure watched by half the town. Davis and his friends were conspicuously absent, having apparently decided that their alliance with the Easterner was no longer advantageous. As the stagecoach disappeared in a cloud of dust, Jacob put his arm around Bethany's shoulders. It's over, he said, though part of him still expected some final strike from Bradford. For now, she agreed, leaning against him. But William doesn't surrender easily. He may try again in some other way. Let him, Jacob replied with newfound confidence. We'll be ready. They rode home together as the sun began to set, the land stretching out before them in a panorama of gold and shadow. Their ranch, lay ahead, the buildings solid against the horizon, cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. It's beautiful, Bethany said softly, everything we've built together. Jacob looked at her, this woman who had brought him back from the edge of loneliness, who had helped him see that the frontier wasn't about isolation, but about connection. It's just the beginning, he promised. We have a lifetime ahead of us. As they reached the house, their home, Jacob lifted Bethany from her saddle, holding her close for a moment before setting her on her feet. The hired hand became a cowgirl, he said with a smile, and love built a home for the lonely rancher. Bethany laughed, the sound carrying across the open land. Is that what happened? It's exactly what happened, Jacob replied, leading her toward the house they had made together. And it's the best story I know. Behind them, the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of promise. Ahead lay their future, a future built on love that had survived the harshest test the frontier could offer. And in that moment, Jacob Porter knew with absolute certainty that some things were worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. For in the wild expanse of Wyoming, where danger and beauty walked hand in hand, he and Bethany had found not just survival, but a love that would endure as long as the mountains stood watch over the valley they called home.